welcome back to my channel. My name is Christine and this is episode 6 of the subnetting series. Today we are going to discuss VLSM, which is Variable Length Subnet Mask. Before moving to today's topic, let's take a look at last episode's practice question. If you've already gone through those questions, feel free to skip this part. Here we have the network 10.0.0.0/8 and as per the requirement we need 20,000 hosts per subnet. The first question is what prefix should we use? Remember that /8 has the first octet as the network portion and the remaining 3 octets as the host portion. So let's start with /16 first. With /16 we have 16 host bits, which gives us 65,536 IP addresses, which is greater than our requirement. So let's check /17. /17 gives us 15 host bits, by which we get 32,768 IP addresses. This might be the closest to our requirement, but for confirmation's sake, let's check the next prefix. /18 gives us 14 host bits, by which we get 16,384 IP addresses, which is less than our requirement. That means we have to use /17 as our prefix. The second question is how many subnets can we make? With /17 we have 9 borrowed bits, giving us 512 subnets. Let's take a look at the first two subnets. In /17 the last network bit is in the third octet, and in the binary place value table it is on the value of 128. That means with increments of 128 in the third octet we get one subnet. The first subnet's range will be from 10.0.0.0 to 10.0.127.255. For the second subnet's range, add 128 to the network and the broadcast address of the previous subnet's third octet, which will give us the range of 10.0.128.0 to 10.0.255.255. Now, we also need to find out which subnet does the IP 10.0.129.1/17 belong to. Since it's /17, we have the last network bit in the third octet, and in the binary place value table it is on the value of 128. That means with increments of 128 we get one subnet. Let's take a look at the first four subnets. Can you guess which of the following subnet includes the IP address? Well, it comes under the second octet, that is 10.0.128.0 to 10.0.255.255. The network address for this subnet is 10.0.128.0. The broadcast address is 10.0.255.255. The first usable address is the network address plus 1, which gives us 10.0.128.1. The last usable address is broadcast address minus 1, which gives us 10.0.255.254. And how many subnets can we make? Again, in /17 we have 9 borrowed bits. That means 2 raised to 9 we get 512 subnets. And how many hosts do we have per subnet? In /17 we have 15 host bits, giving us 32,768 IP addresses per subnet. If you want to check out all the 512 subnets, I will link a website down in the description below. Now, let's move to today's topic. First, let's start by understanding what VLSM is. VLSM stands for Variable Length Subnet Mask, and it is a process of creating different size subnets. The questions that we discussed regarding CIDR till now involved subnetting the network into equal size subnets using the same prefix. For example, if we had the network 192.168.4.0/24 and we needed 8 subnets, we would use /27 for all the subnets, giving us 32 IP addresses per subnet. But what if out of those 8 subnets some only required 3 IP addresses? Or what if we had a point-to-point connection? Having 32 addresses for these subnets was still an excessive amount of wastage of IP addresses. That is where VLSM comes into play. Instead of having the same prefix for every subnet, we can use different prefix lengths for different subnets according to the requirement. Let's understand this with a question. Here we have the network 192.168.4.0/24 and we need 4 subnets with the following requirement. The first subnet needs 100 hosts, the second subnet needs 20 hosts, the third subnet needs 50 hosts, and the fourth needs 30 hosts. In total, we need 200 IP addresses. And with /24, we have 256 total IP addresses, giving us enough room for these subnets. Let's start finding the prefix for each of these subnets, starting with the subnet with the greatest number of hosts, that is 100. So with /24, we get 256 IP addresses, which is greater than our requirement. Let's check /25. /25 gives us 128 IP addresses, which does seem close to our requirement, but for confirmation, let's check the next prefix. /26 gives us 64 IP addresses, which is less than our requirement. That means we are going to use /25 for this subnet. Now on to the second largest subnet, which is 50 hosts. Slash 26 gives us 64 IP addresses, which might be the closest to our requirement. But let's check the next prefix. Slash 27 gives us 32 IP addresses, which is less than our requirement. Hence, the prefix that we are going to use for this subnet is slash 26. For the third largest subnet with 30 hosts, we know that slash 27 gives us 32 IP addresses, which is perfectly enough for our requirement, as we will need 2 IP addresses for our network and broadcast address. So for this subnet, we will use slash 27. On to our last subnet, we have 20 hosts. So slash 27 gives us 32 IP addresses. Let's check the next prefix. Slash 28 gives us 16 IP addresses. That means even for this subnet, we are going to use slash 27. Let's take a look at the range of each of these subnets, starting from the largest. For 100 hosts, we used slash 25, which has the network bit in the last octet and on the value of 128. That means with increments of 128 in the last octet give us one subnet. And the range we get is 192.168.4.0 to 192.168.4.127. And the subnet mask for this subnet is 255.255.255.128. For 50 hosts, we used slash 26, which has the last network bit in the third octet, and on the value of 64 in the binary place value table. That means with increments of 64 in the last octet, we get our subnet. This subnet's network address will be the last subnet's broadcast address plus 1, which is 192.168.4.128, and for the broadcast address add 64 to the last octet, which gives us 192.168.4.191. For the subnet with 30 hosts, we use slash 27, which has the last network bit in the last octet and on the value of 32 in the binary place value table. This means with increments of 32 in the last octet, we get our subnet. Similarly, for this subnet's network address, it will be the previous subnet's broadcast address plus 1, which gives us 192.168.4.192, and for the broadcast address, add 32 to the last octet, which gives us 192.168.4.223. For the last subnet, we again used slash 27. With increments of 32 in the last octet, we get our subnet. This subnet's network address is the previous subnet's broadcast address plus 1, which gives us 192.168.4.224, and for the broadcast address add 32 to the last octet, which gives us 192.168.4.255. That's it. Let's look at another question. Here we have the network of 133.16.0.0/16, and we need to make 4 subnets. So the first subnet needs 200 hosts, the second subnet needs 500 hosts, the third subnet needs 1000 hosts, and the fourth subnet needs 3000 hosts. In total, we need 4700 IP addresses. First, let's start by finding prefixes for each of these subnets. Starting with the largest subnet, which is the subnet with 3000 hosts. For 3000 hosts, slash 19 has 13 host bits, which gives us 8192 IP addresses, which is greater than our requirement. So let's move on to the next one. Slash 20 has 12 host bits, which gives us 4096 IP addresses, which does seem enough for our requirement. But let's check the next prefix. Slash 21 has 11 host bits, giving us 2048 IP addresses, which is less than our requirement. That means we are going to use slash 20 for this prefix. Next, for 1000 hosts. Slash 22 has 10 host bits, giving us 1024 IP addresses. Slash 23 has 9 host bits, which gives us 512 IP addresses. Can you guess which one of these is the best fit for our requirement? It is slash 22. Now onto the next subnet with 500 hosts. Slash 23 has 9 host bits, which gives us 512 IP addresses, which is enough for our requirement. Lastly, for the subnet with 200 hosts, slash 24 has 8 host bits, which gives us 256 IP addresses, which does fit our requirement. Now, now that we have our prefixes, let's take a look at the range. For the subnet with 3000 hosts, we used slash 20, which gives it the subnet mask of 255.255.240.0. In slash 20, the last network bit is in the third octet, and it is on the value of 16 in the binary place value table. That means with increments of 16 in the third octet, we get a subnet, which is 133.16.0.0 to 133.16.15.255. Now, for the subnet with 1000 hosts, we used slash 22, giving us the subnet mask of 255.255.252.0. For this subnet in slash 22, the last network bit is in the third octet, and it is on the value of 4 in the binary place value table. This means with increments of 4 in the third octet, we get our subnet. This subnet network address is last subnet's broadcast address plus 1, which is 133.16.16.0, and adding 4 to the third octet we get the broadcast address of 133.16.19.255. Now for the subnet with 500 hosts, we used /23, giving us the subnet mask of 255.255.254.0. In /23, the last network bit is in the third octet, and in the binary place value table it is on the value of 2. That means with increments of 2, we get a subnet. This subnet's network address is the last subnet's broadcast address plus 1, which gives us 133.16.20.0. And adding 2 to the third octet, we get the broadcast address of 133.16.21.255. Lastly, for the subnet with 200 hosts, we used /24, which gives us the subnet mask of 255.255.255.0. In /24, the last network bit is in the third octet and on the value of 1 in the binary place value table. That means with increments of 1 in the third octet, we get a subnet. The network address for this subnet is last subnet's broadcast address plus 1, which is 133.16.22.0. And for the broadcast address, add 1 to the third octet, which is 133.16.22.255. That's it. Now let's take a look at a scenario type of question, and thanks to AI for generating this question. So you're designing a network for a company, and the company has three departments: sales, marketing, and engineering. The sales department has 60 hosts, the department of marketing has 30 hosts, and the engineering department has 20 hosts. Additionally, two more subnets are needed for administrative purposes, each with 10 hosts. The network allocated is 192.168.4.0/24, and what we need to find out is what prefixes should we use for each subnet, along with the subnet mask, the number of usable IP addresses, the network and the broadcast address for each subnet, and the subnet range for every department and the administrative departments. So first, in total, we need 130 IP addresses, and with /24, we have 256 usable addresses, giving us enough room to make these subnets. So first, let's start by finding the prefixes. Starting with the largest subnet, for the subnet with 60 hosts, we using /26, we get 64 IP addresses. For the subnet with 30 hosts, we are going to use /27, which will give us 32 IP addresses. For the subnet with 20 hosts, we are going to use /27, which is also going to give us 32 IP addresses. For both administrative departments consisting of 10 hosts each, we are going to use /28, which will give us /16 IP address, which will give us 16 IP addresses per subnet. Now let's take a look at the subnet mask for each of these subnets. For the subnet with 60 hosts, we used /26, which gives us the subnet mask of 255.255.255.192. For the subnet with 30 and 20 hosts, we used /27, giving us the subnet mask of 255.255.255.224. And lastly, for the two administrative departments having 10 hosts, we used /28, giving us the subnet mask of 255.255.255.240. Now let's take a look at the range. For /26, the last network bit is in the fourth octet, and in the binary place value table, it is on the value of 64. That means with increments of 64 in the fourth octet, we get our subnet. And the range is 192.168.4.0 to 192.168.4.63. And the host assignable addresses are from 192.168.4.1 to 192.168.4.62. For the subnet with 30 hosts, using /27, the last network bit is in the fourth octet, and in the binary place value table, it is on the value of 32. Hence, increments of 32 in the last octet will give us our subnet. Again, for this subnet's network address, add 1 to the previous subnet's broadcast address, which gives us 192.168.4.64. And for the broadcast address, add 32 to the last octet, which gives us 192.168.4.95. And the host assignable IP addresses are from 192.168.4.65 to 192.168.4.94. For the subnet with 20 hosts, using /27, the last network bit is in the fourth octet, and in the binary place value table, it is on the value of 32. Again, with increments of 32 in the last octet, we get our subnet. For this subnet's network address, add 1 to the previous subnet's broadcast address, which gives us 192.168.4.96. And for the broadcast address, add 32 to the last octet, which gives us 192.168.4.127. The host assignable IP addresses are from 192.168.4.97 to 192.168.4.126. For the administrative department one having 10 hosts and using /28, the last network bit is in the last octet, and in the binary place value table it is on the value of 16. That means with increments of 16 in the last octet, we will get a subnet. And for this subnet's network address, add 1 to the previous subnet's broadcast address, which gives us 192.168.4.128. And for the broadcast address, add 16 to the last octet, which gives us 192.168.4.143. The host assignable addresses are from 192.168.4.192 to 192.168.4.142. Lastly, for the administrative department 2, having 10 hosts, we are using /28, which has the last network bit in the last octet, and in the binary place value table, it is on the value of 16. That means with increments of 16 in the last octet, we get a subnet. For this subnet's network address, add 1 to the previous subnet's broadcast address, which gives us 192.168.4.144. And for the broadcast address, add 16 to the last octet, which gives us 192.168.4.159. And the host assignable addresses for this subnet are from 192.168.4.145 to 192.168.4.158. So that's it. That's it for this video, and as usual we have one practice question which we will discuss at the end of the next episode, because the next video is going to be a lab exercise in packet tracer. So make sure to stay tuned for that, and don't forget to like and share this video and subscribe for more updates like this, and I'll see you next time. Bye.